The old man is going to be a problem, my son's wife said through the cracked window. I stood frozen on their front porch, fruit tart in hand, listening to my own family plan my betrayal. They called me a burden who would ruin their perfect vacation. The same vacation I had just spent $25,000 of my retirement savings to give them. My daughter-in-law, Brittany, thought she was dealing with a confused, helpless widower who could be manipulated and discarded. My son Marcus sat there silently, letting his wife orchestrate my humiliation with the precision of a corporate takeover. They wanted to steal my cruise tickets, while convincing me it was for my own good. But they made one critical mistake. They forgot that this old man had spent 40 years as an engineering manager, solving complex problems and outmaneuvering people who underestimated him. What happened next would teach them that respect isn't negotiable and that some mistakes come with consequences they never saw coming. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. 2 years. That's how long it's been since Margaret passed, and I still wake up at exactly 5:45 a.m. every morning. Old habits die hard, especially when you've spent 4 decades managing manufacturing schedules, where precision meant the difference between profit and loss. My internal clock doesn't care that there's no one left to share breakfast with. I swing my legs out of bed and pad across the hardwood floor. Margaret and I installed ourselves back in '89. The house feels too big now, too quiet. 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, and a kitchen designed for a family that never quite materialized the way we'd hoped. Marcus was our only child, and now he's got his own life 30 minutes away in Waterloo. The coffee routine is sacred. 2 scoops of Folgers. Not the fancy stuff, just honest coffee for honest people. I measure the water precisely 16 ounces. Enough for 2 mugs. I catch myself every single morning standing there with 2 ceramic mugs in my hands, staring at Margaret's empty chair at the kitchen table. The blue one with the chip on the handle that she refused to let me throw away. "Damn it, Jeffrey," I mutter, putting one mug back in the cabinet. You'd think after 730 mornings I'd remember I only need 1 cup now. I settle into my chair with the Cedar Falls Gazette and my coffee. The obituaries first. Morbid habit, but at my age you start recognizing names. Then the local news, sports, and finally the opinion section that always gets my blood pressure up. The silence is what gets to me most. Margaret used to read me the interesting bits, comment on the high school football scores, laugh at the ridiculous letters to the editor. The back door creaks open around 7:30 and I know it's Frank Morrison from next door. We've had this routine for 6 months now, ever since he noticed I was struggling with the loneliness. "Morning, Jeff," Frank calls out, his voice carrying that slight rasp from 40 years of Marlboros before his wife finally made him quit. Coffee's on. I assume I pour him a cup. The second mug finally getting its purpose. Frank's 71, retired from the police department, and the kind of neighbor who still believes in looking out for people. His wife Helen passed 3 years ago, so we understand each other's situation without needing to discuss it much. "Read about the Henderson boy making All-State in wrestling," Frank says, settling into Margaret's chair like he belongs there. It should bother me, but somehow it doesn't. Remember when Marcus was that age? Kid could have been something if he'd stuck with it. Brittany thought wrestling was too rough. I reply, the familiar bitter taste in my mouth whenever my daughter-in-law's name comes up. Said it might affect his college applications. Frank just nods. He's heard this story before. Marcus had been good, really good, until his junior year when he met Brittany Sterling at a debate tournament. Pretty girl from the wealthy side of town, daughter of a banker and a country club socialite. Marcus dropped wrestling, started wearing different clothes, talking differently. Started becoming someone else. "You hear from him lately?" Frank asks, though he already knows the answer. "Sunday calls," I say. "Every week at exactly 2 p.m. like clockwork. 10 minutes of weather work and how busy they are. Brittany usually takes the phone after 5 minutes to ask if I need anything from the store, which really means, are you done talking to my husband yet? The phone rings as if summoned by our conversation. 8:15 a.m. Unusual timing for Marcus, but I recognize his number on the caller ID. "Morning, son," I answer. "Hey, Dad." His voice sounds tired. "Just wanted to check in before work gets crazy." "How are you holding up?" It's a loaded question. How am I holding up? I'm a 6-7-year-old widower living alone in a house built for a family, talking to my neighbor every morning because he's the only person who seems to care if I'm breathing. My son calls me out of obligation, and my daughter-in-law treats me like an inconvenience. I'm fine, Marcus. Same as always. How's work treating you? Can't complain. IT consulting keeps the bills paid. There's a pause, and I hear Brittany's voice in the background, sharp and impatient. Listen, Dad, I've got to run. Brittany needs me to drop her off at the office. Her BMW's in the shop again. Of course, at Island. That car spends more time being pampered than most people spend on vacation. Sure thing, son. Drive safe. Will do. Love you, Dad. The line goes dead before I can respond. Frank's watching me over his coffee mug, those old cop eyes seeing everything I'm trying not to show. 5 minutes this time, he observes. Progress, I joke, but it falls flat. Frank leans back in his chair, studying me. Jeff, when's the last time you did something for yourself, something that made you happy instead of just filling time? I consider the question seriously. Engineering trained me to solve problems systematically, but this isn't a manufacturing issue with clear parameters and solutions. This is loneliness, and I'm not sure there's a blueprint for fixing that. I volunteer at the community center I offer. That's doing something for other people. I asked about you. He's right, of course. Everything I do these days is routine maintenance. Keeping the house up, staying healthy, maintaining the bare minimum of social connections. I exist, but I'm not really living. After Frank leaves, I sit in the quiet kitchen, staring at Margaret's empty chair and thinking about his question. When did I last feel genuinely happy? When did I last look forward to something instead of just enduring another day? The answer hits me like a punch to the gut. I can't remember. That evening, Frank's question kept echoing in my head. When's the last time I did something that made me happy? I found myself wandering through the house, looking at it with fresh eyes. Every room held memories of Margaret, but I'd been so focused on preserving them that I'd forgotten how to create new ones. I ended up in my home office, surrounded by the organized chaos that comes from 40 years of engineering documentation. Margaret used to joke that I kept files on our grocery lists, and she wasn't entirely wrong. But tonight I wasn't looking for technical manuals or retirement paperwork. I was drawn to the bottom drawer of my desk where I kept our personal photo albums. The leather-bound album from our Caribbean cruise 10 years ago was right where I'd left it, gathering dust, like so many other pieces of our life together. Margaret had insisted on that trip for our 35th wedding anniversary, even though I'd grumbled about the expense and the time away from work. Jeffrey Walker, she'd said, hands on her hips in that way that meant business. When's the last time we did something just for us? I opened the album carefully, and there we were. Margaret, in her favorite blue sundress, laughing at something I'd said while we stood on the ship's deck. The sunset behind us painted the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed impossible, like something from a postcard. In another photo, we were at the captain's dinner, both of us dressed up and looking genuinely happy. Margaret's smile could light up a room, and in that picture, she was positively glowing. But it was the last photo that stopped me cold. We were sitting at a table with another couple we'd met on the ship, the Hendersons from Minnesota. All four of us were laughing at something, drinks in hand, looking like the kind of people who knew how to enjoy life. Margaret had written in her careful script at the bottom, "Best vacation ever. Hope we can do this again with Marcus and his family someday." Marcus and his family. She'd wanted to share these kinds of experiences with our son, to create the kind of memories that would bind us together as a family. Margaret always believed that shared experiences were what made relationships strong. She'd been the social coordinator of our marriage, the one who planned gatherings and insisted on family traditions. I sat back in my chair studying that photo and thinking about Margaret's dream. What if I could make it happen? What if I could give Marcus and Brittany, and yes, even her parents, the kind of experience that might help us reconnect as a family? The engineering part of my brain kicked into gear immediately. This wasn't just a sentimental notion. It was a problem that needed solving. The problem, family relationships that had grown distant and strained. The solution, create an environment where we could spend quality time together without the usual distractions and tensions. I fired up my computer and started researching cruise options. If I was going to do this, I was going to do it right. Margaret had taught me that experiences were investments in relationships, and good investments required thorough research. I spent the next 3 hours building spreadsheets comparing different cruise lines, itineraries, and cabin options. Norwegian, Royal Caribbean, Celebrity. Each had their advantages and drawbacks. I analyzed departure dates, weather patterns, and onboard amenities with the same methodical approach I'd used for manufacturing efficiency studies. The Caribbean seemed like the obvious choice. Margaret had loved it, the weather would be perfect, and there were plenty of activities for different age groups. I narrowed it down to a 14-day cruise departing from Miami, visiting 7 different islands. The ship was practically a floating resort. Multiple restaurants, entertainment venues, spa facilities, even rock climbing walls, and surf simulators for the younger folks. Now came the cabin selection. This was where my engineering background really paid off. I studied the deck plans like blueprints, analyzing sightlines, noise factors, and proximity to elevators and amenities. If I was going to invest in this family reunion, everyone needed to be comfortable. 5 cabins with ocean view balconies. One for me, one for Marcus and Brittany, and yes, one each for Richard and Linda Sterling. Including Brittany's parents was a calculated decision. I'd never particularly warmed to them, Richard with his investment banker arrogance, and Linda with her country club pretensions. But Margaret had always insisted that marriage meant accepting the whole family package. The cost was substantial, $25,000 for everything. 5 cabins, all meals entertainment, shore excursions, even the specialty restaurants and spa treatments. It was more than I'd spent on anything since Margaret's funeral, but I had the money. 40 years of steady work, careful investing, and modest living had left me comfortable. What good was financial security if I couldn't use it to bring my family together? I pulled up the booking website and started filling out the forms. Jeffrey Walker, primary passenger, Marcus Walker and Brittany Sterling Walker, Richard Sterling and Linda Sterling. 5 adults, 14 days, departing in 8 weeks. My finger hovered over the complete purchase button. This was a big step, the kind of grand gesture that Margaret would have loved, but that my practical engineering mind wanted to analyze from every angle. What if they couldn't get the time off work? What if Brittany's parents had other commitments? What if Marcus felt awkward about accepting such an expensive gift? But then I looked at that photo again, at Margaret's hopeful expression and her handwritten note about doing this with Marcus and his family someday. She'd believed in the power of shared experiences to heal relationships and create bonds. If she were here, she'd be pushing me to take the leap. I clicked Complete Purchase. The confirmation email arrived immediately, complete with booking numbers, payment receipts, and a detailed itinerary. I printed everything out and organized it in a new folder labeled Family Cruise 2024. Margaret would have been proud of my filing system. Sitting back in my chair, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, genuine excitement. For the first time since Margaret's death, I had something to look forward to, something that might actually bring joy instead of just filling time. I could already imagine it, Marcus and me talking on the deck like we used to when he was younger, before Brittany and her parents started influencing his priorities. Maybe Brittany would relax away from her real estate pressures and remember that I wasn't just her husband's inconvenient father. Maybe Richard and Linda would see that I was more than just a small-town retiree with outdated ideas. This cruise was going to change everything. I was sure of it. The next evening, I could barely contain my excitement as I dialed Marcus's number. It was 7 p.m., after dinner, but before the evening news, the perfect time for a conversation that didn't feel rushed or obligatory. For once, I had genuinely good news to share instead of just checking in about the weather. "Hey, Dad," Marcus answered on the second ring. "This is a nice surprise. Usually we talk on Sundays." "I know, son, but I have something special to tell you." "Are you sitting down?" I heard him chuckle, and for a moment he sounded like the boy I used to take fishing at Pine Lake. "Should I be worried you're not sick, are you?" "No, nothing like that. Quite the opposite, actually." I took a deep breath, savoring the moment. "How would you like to go on a Caribbean cruise, 2 weeks all expenses paid, just the family?" The silence on the other end stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Then Marcus's voice came through, filled with genuine surprise and something I hadn't heard in years, excitement. "Dad, are you serious? A cruise, when 8 weeks from now?" "I've already booked everything. Flights to Miami, ocean view cabins, all the excursions you could want. I found this incredible 14-day itinerary that hits 7 different islands. There's snorkeling in Cozumel, shopping in Street Thomas, even a private beach day in the Bahamas. Wow, Dad. That's incredibly generous. I can't believe you did this." His voice was warm, grateful, and for the first time in months, I felt like I was talking to my son instead of a stranger making polite conversation. Brittany's going to flip when she hears about this. She's been so stressed with work lately, and she's always talking about wanting to take a real vacation. My heart swelled. This was exactly the reaction I'd hoped for. Genuine appreciation and excitement about spending time together as a family. Maybe Margaret had been right about the power of shared experiences. "Put me on speaker," I said. "I want to tell Brittany myself." "Brittany, honey, come here," Marcus called out. "Dad has incredible news." I heard footsteps, then Brittany's voice bright and interested. Jeffrey, what's this about a surprise? Hello, Brittany. I hope you're sitting down because I just booked a 2-week Caribbean cruise for the whole family. All expenses paid. I want this to be my gift to you and Marcus. Her reaction was immediate and enthusiastic. Oh my God, Jeffrey, that's amazing. I can't believe you did this, Marcus. Did you hear that? 2 weeks in the Caribbean? But then, almost immediately, her tone shifted to something more practical, more focused. Tell me everything. What cruise line? Which ship? What are the cabin arrangements? I launched into the details I'd memorized from my research. The Celebrity Eclipse, departing from Miami, 7-island itinerary, ocean view balconies for everyone. As I talked, I noticed Brittany asking increasingly specific questions. So the reservations are all in your name, she asked. That's right. I'm the primary passenger, and everyone else is listed under my booking. And where are the actual tickets? I mean, the boarding passes and documentation. Something in her tone made me pause. It wasn't excited curiosity anymore. It was more like inventory taking. Well, it's all electronic these days, but I have all the confirmation numbers and booking information. Why do you ask? Oh, I just like to be organized, you know me. I'm thinking we should probably coordinate our packing, maybe book some shore excursions together. Who handles all that? You, or do we need to manage our own arrangements? I can handle whatever you'd like. I said, though I was starting to feel slightly off balance. I thought we could decide on activities once we're on board. That's part of the fun, right? Being spontaneous. Of course, Brittany said quickly. I just want to make sure we don't miss out on anything good because we didn't plan ahead. Some of those popular excursions fill up fast. And what about the cabin assignments? Did you get us all on the same deck? Marcus must have sensed something in the conversation because he took the phone back. Dad, this is incredible. Really. We're both so grateful. When do we need to start planning? Before I could answer, I heard Brittany's voice in the background. Ask him about travel insurance and whether the dining reservations are flexible. Oh, and find out if Brittany wants to know about some of the logistics, Marcus interrupted. You know how she is about planning. I did know how she was about planning. Brittany approached everything like a military operation, which I'd always attributed to her success in real estate. But something about her questions felt different tonight. Less excited, more calculating. There's one more thing, I said, making a decision I hoped I wouldn't regret. I was thinking we should invite your in-laws, too. Make it a real family reunion. The silence was brief, but noticeable. Then Brittany's voice came through clearly. My parents, on the cruise. If they're available and interested. I know how close you are to them, and Margaret always believed that marriage meant embracing the whole family. I'd be happy to include Richard and Linda. Another pause, then Marcus. That's really thoughtful, Dad. Let us talk to them and see if they can get the time off. Richard's always talking about wanting to try a cruise. Wonderful. I'll call the cruise line tomorrow and add 2 more cabins to the reservation. After we hung up, I sat in my office chair, staring at the booking confirmation on my computer screen. The conversation had gone well. Marcus had been genuinely excited and Brittany had seemed thrilled. So, why did I feel slightly unsettled? Maybe it was just nerves. This was the biggest gesture I'd made since Margaret's death, the most money I'd spent on anything besides necessities. It was natural to have some second thoughts about such a significant investment. But as I replayed the conversation in my mind, I kept coming back to Brittany's questions. Not what she'd asked exactly, but how she'd asked them. There had been something almost clinical about her interest in the booking details, like she was gathering information rather than sharing excitement. I shook my head, dismissing the thought. This was exactly the kind of overthinking that had kept me isolated for 2 years. Brittany was detail-oriented. That's what made her good at her job. There was nothing wrong with wanting to understand the arrangements for a major vacation. Still, as I prepared for bed that night, I found myself thinking about the subtle shift in her voice when she'd moved from excitement to questions. Maybe I was being paranoid, but 40 years of managing people had taught me to pay attention to tone and body language, and something about Brittany's tone had set off a small alarm bell in the back of my mind. I told myself I was imagining things. This cruise was going to be exactly what our family needed. Quality time together, shared experiences, and a chance to rebuild the connections that had grown strained over the years. Margaret would have been proud of me for taking this step, but as I turned off the lights, I couldn't quite shake the feeling that I'd missed something important in that conversation, something that my engineer's instinct for problem-solving was trying to tell me. A week later, I received something that had become increasingly rare over the past few years, a genuine invitation to Sunday dinner at Marcus and Brittany's house. Not the obligatory holiday gatherings or the quick coffee visits that felt more like duty calls, but an actual family meal where I was specifically asked to join them. We thought it would be nice to discuss the cruise details in person, Brittany had said when she called. Maybe we can all plan some activities together and make sure everyone's on the same page. I arrived at their house in Waterloo at exactly 5 p.m., carrying a leather portfolio filled with cruise brochures, deck plans, and the detailed itinerary I'd printed out. Their neighborhood always made me slightly uncomfortable. Oversized houses with perfect lawns that looked more like magazine photos than places where people actually lived. Everything was too clean, too coordinated, too much like a display rather than a home. Marcus answered the door with a genuine smile, and for a moment I felt optimistic about the evening. Dad, great timing. Brittany's just putting the finishing touches on dinner, and her parents got here about an hour ago. Richard and Linda Sterling were already settled in the living room, drinks in hand, looking like they owned the place. Richard stood to shake my hand, a firm practiced grip that came from decades of closing business deals. Linda remained seated, offering me one of those polite smiles that never quite reached her eyes. Jeffrey Richard said, "Congratulations on this generous cruise gesture. Very impressive for someone on a fixed income." The comment stung, though I tried not to show it. Richard knew perfectly well that my retirement was comfortable, not some bare-bones social security existence. But he'd always had a way of making subtle digs that were just ambiguous enough to deny if called out. "I'm fortunate to be able to do something special for the family," I replied evenly. "Oh, it's wonderful," Linda chimed, in her voice carrying that particular tone wealthy women use when they're being gracious about accepting something from their social inferiors. "At your age, Jeffrey, it's wise to let the younger generation handle the complicated arrangements. These cruise bookings can be so confusing with all the modern technology." I felt my jaw tighten. At my age, I was 67, not 97, and I'd been managing complex technical systems since before Brittany was born. But I forced a smile and opened my portfolio. "Actually, I've got everything organized right here. Thought we could go through the options together and see what interests everyone." Brittany appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Perfect timing. "Dinner's ready, but first let's spread everything out on the dining room table so we can really dive into the details." What followed was one of the most frustrating conversations I'd had in years. I'd barely started explaining the itinerary when Brittany began taking charge of the entire discussion. She moved my carefully organized brochures around, rearranging them according to her own system. She interrupted my explanations to ask rapid-fire questions about booking procedures, cabin assignments, and boarding protocols. "So the dining reservations. We can change those, right?" she asked, not waiting for my answer before continuing. "And the shore excursions, those need to be booked in advance. What about the specialty restaurants? Are those included? Or do we need separate reservations?" I tried to keep up with her questions, but she was moving through topics faster than I could respond. It felt less like a family planning session and more like an interrogation. Every time I started to share something I was excited about, the private beach day, the snorkeling opportunities, the onboard entertainment, she'd redirect the conversation back to logistics and procedures. "The most important thing," Richard interjected, "is making sure someone responsible is handling all the documentation. These cruise companies can be tricky about changes and cancellations." "Absolutely," Linda agreed. "Jeffrey, you've done a wonderful job getting everything started, but now that the family's involved, maybe it makes sense for Brittany to take point on the details. She's so good with this kind of coordination." I looked around the table, waiting for Marcus to say something, anything that might indicate he understood what was happening. His wife and her parents were essentially suggesting that I wasn't competent to manage a trip I'd planned and paid for. But Marcus just nodded along, apparently oblivious to the insult. "That makes sense," he said. "Brittany's great at organizing this stuff, and she's got more flexibility with her schedule to handle any last-minute changes. I appreciate the offer," I said carefully, "but I've got everything under control. The cruise line has excellent customer service, and I've already established a relationship with our booking agent." Brittany's smile became a bit more strained. "Of course, Jeffrey. I just want to make sure we're not missing any opportunities. Some of these popular shore excursions book up months in advance, and if we wait too long—" "I understand your concern," I interrupted, "but we still have 7 weeks. Plenty of time to make decisions once we're all together and can discuss preferences." The conversation continued through dinner, but the pattern was established. Every suggestion I made was met with a better alternative from Brittany. Every detail I'd researched was questioned or second-guessed. By the time we reached dessert, I felt like a guest at my own party, tolerated but not really included in the decision-making process. The breaking point came when Richard suggested that maybe I should transfer the booking to Brittany's name for convenience. That way, he explained, if any issues come up, she can handle them directly without having to go through you. More efficient for everyone. I set down my coffee cup with enough force that it rattled against the saucer. The booking stays in my name. I'm paying for this cruise. I organized it, and I'll manage it. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Linda cleared her throat delicately. Of course, Jeffrey. No one's questioning your capabilities. We're just trying to be helpful. But I could see it in their faces. The subtle exchange of glances. The barely concealed impatience with my stubbornness. They weren't trying to be helpful. They were trying to take control of something that belonged to me. Marcus finally spoke up, but not in the way I'd hoped. Dad, maybe we could compromise. You keep the main booking, but let Brittany handle some of the activity planning. She really is good at this stuff. Even my own son was siding with them. Not maliciously, perhaps, but he was so eager to avoid conflict that he couldn't see what was really happening. His wife and her parents were systematically undermining me, and he was helping them do it. I gathered up my brochures and put them back in the portfolio. I think we've covered enough for tonight. There's still plenty of time to work out the details. As I prepared to leave, Brittany walked me to the door. Jeffrey, I hope you don't think we're being pushy. We're all just so excited about this trip, and I want to make sure everything goes perfectly. I'm sure it will, I replied, though I was no longer certain that was true. Driving home through the quiet streets of Cedar Falls, I found myself analyzing the evening with the same systematic approach I'd once used to troubleshoot manufacturing problems. The symptoms were clear. My authority was being questioned, my competence was being undermined, and my own son was either unable or unwilling to defend me. The engineering part of my brain was starting to recognize a pattern, and it wasn't one I liked. But I wasn't ready to accept what that pattern might mean. Not yet. 1 week before our scheduled departure, I decided to drop by Marcus's house unannounced. It wasn't something I normally did. Brittany had made it clear over the years that she preferred advance notice for visits, but I'd been thinking about our dinner conversation and wanted to smooth over any lingering tension. Maybe I'd been too defensive about maintaining control of the cruise arrangements. Maybe a peace offering was in order. I'd stopped at the bakery and picked up one of those expensive fruit tarts that Brittany liked, the kind with perfect strawberry arrangements that cost more than I used to spend on groceries for a week. It seemed like a small gesture that might help reset our relationship before we spent 2 weeks together on a ship. As I pulled into their driveway at around 2 p.m. on a Wednesday afternoon, I was surprised to see so many cars. Marcus's Honda was there, of course, but so was Brittany's BMW, Richard's black Cadillac, and Linda's white Mercedes. It looked like some kind of family meeting was in progress. My first instinct was to leave. I hadn't been invited to whatever this gathering was, and showing up uninvited with a fruit tart would make me look foolish. But then I remembered Margaret's advice about family relationships. Sometimes you have to make the first move even when it's uncomfortable. I parked on the street and walked up the front path carrying the bakery box and rehearsing what I'd say. Something casual about being in the neighborhood, maybe a joke about bringing dessert to crash their party. But as I approached the front door, I could hear voices coming from the living room window, which was cracked open to let in the spring breeze. I should have rung the doorbell immediately. I should have announced my presence and joined whatever conversation was happening inside. But something about the tone of the voices made me pause. There was an intensity to the discussion, a seriousness that made me hesitate. And then I heard my name. The old man is going to be a problem, Brittany's voice came through clearly. He's being stubborn about the arrangements, and if we don't get control of those tickets soon, this whole plan falls apart. I froze on the front step, the bakery box suddenly feeling heavy in my hands. Old man. Is that what she called me when I wasn't around? Richard's voice responded. Can't Marcus just convince him to hand over the documentation? Tell him it's for insurance purposes or something. I've tried. Marcus said, and his voice sounded tired, defeated. He's suspicious now. Ever since the dinner last week, he's been asking too many questions about why we need the booking information. My heart started pounding. I stepped closer to the window, staying out of sight but positioning myself where I could hear every word. This wasn't a casual family gathering. This was a meeting about me, about the cruise I'd planned and paid for. Linda's voice joined the conversation. Well, we can't just let him come with us. The man will be a burden the entire time. He'll want to go to bed early, he'll complain about the food, he'll slow us down on every excursion. This is supposed to be a vacation, not a babysitting job. Plus, there's the money factor, Richard added, and I could hear the calculation in his voice. If Jeffrey doesn't come, that's one less cabin we have to worry about. The cruise line might even give us a partial refund, or we could upgrade our accommodations with the savings. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. They weren't just planning to exclude me from the cruise. They were planning to profit from my absence. Brittany's voice became more animated. Exactly. And honestly, at his age, a 2-week cruise might be too much for him anyway. What if he has some kind of medical emergency? What if his blood pressure acts up? We'd be stuck dealing with it in the middle of the ocean. Does he actually have blood pressure problems? Linda asked. I don't know, but he's 67, Brittany replied dismissively. Something's bound to go wrong. It's better for everyone if he just stays home. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. They were discussing my health, my age, my supposed limitations like I was a piece of broken furniture they needed to dispose of. And they were doing it while sitting in a house that I'd helped Marcus buy, planning a vacation that I was paying for. But it was Marcus's voice that broke my heart. I feel bad about this. He's really excited about the trip. It's the happiest I've seen him since Mom died. For a moment I thought my son might actually defend me. I waited for him to tell his wife that this plan was wrong, that I deserved better treatment, that excluding me from a cruise I'd planned and paid for was unthinkable. Instead, Brittany's voice cut through his weak protest. Marcus, honey, we've been through this. Your father will be much more comfortable at home. He can watch his programs, keep his routine, not worry about all the complications of travel. We're doing this for his own good. I suppose, Marcus said, and I could hear him giving in. But how do we actually make it happen? We can't just tell him he's not coming. Richard took charge, his investment banker voice laying out the strategy. Here's what we do. We get the tickets from him using some excuse, insurance verification, travel agent requirements, whatever works. Then the day before departure we tell him there's been a problem. The cruise line has concerns about passengers his age traveling without medical clearance. We say his doctor needs to provide additional documentation that we don't have time to get. Will he believe that? Linda asked. He'll have to, Brittany replied. What choice will he have? We'll already have the tickets and the ship will be leaving the next day. He can't exactly book a last-minute replacement cruise. They had it all figured out. Every detail, every lie, every manipulation designed to steal the vacation I'd planned while making it look like it was for my own benefit. The old man would be too confused, too overwhelmed, too grateful for their concern to fight back. But the worst part was still coming. The main thing, Richard continued, is that we don't let sentiment get in the way of practical decisions. Jeffrey had his time to travel when he was younger. Now it's our turn to enjoy life without being held back by his limitations. Exactly, Brittany agreed. And honestly, it'll be better for everyone. We can actually relax and have fun instead of worrying about whether the old man is keeping up or having a good time. Sometimes you have to make tough decisions for the good of the family. Old man. There it was again. Not Jeffrey, not Dad, not even Marcus's father. Just the old man. Like I was some anonymous burden they'd inherited and needed to manage. I stood there on the front step, holding a fruit tart I'd bought as a peace offering, listening to my family plan my betrayal with the efficiency of a corporate takeover. They had reduced me to a problem to be solved, an obstacle to be removed, a source of funding that unfortunately came with inconvenient human attachments. The conversation was winding down. They were discussing logistics now, who would approach me about the tickets, what excuse they'd use, how they'd coordinate their stories. I realized I needed to leave before someone came to the door or looked out the window. I walked back to my car as quietly as possible, my hands shaking as I set the bakery box on the passenger seat. The fruit tart suddenly seemed like the most pathetic thing in the world, a desperate old man's attempt to buy affection from people who saw him as nothing more than a walking ATM. As I drove home through the familiar streets of Cedar Falls, my mind was racing. The engineering part of my brain was already analyzing the problem, breaking it down into components, looking for solutions. They thought they were dealing with a confused, helpless old man who would accept whatever story they fed him. They thought I'd be grateful for their concern and quietly accept my exclusion from a trip I'd planned and paid for. They were wrong. For the first time since Margaret's death, I felt something other than loneliness or grief. I felt anger, cold, focused, analytical anger. They wanted to treat me like a problem to be managed, fine. But they'd forgotten something important about engineers. We're very good at solving problems. and right now they had become my problem to solve. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the hurt and shock were already transforming into something more useful. I'd spent 40 years managing complex systems, dealing with people who underestimated me, finding solutions to problems that seemed impossible. This situation was no different. It just required a different kind of engineering. I sat in my car for a long moment, staring at my house. The house Margaret and I had built together. The house I'd maintained and improved for 35 years. The house that would someday be Marcus's inheritance if he denied it, proved worthy of it. But first I had some planning to do. The old man they'd called me, the burden, the obstacle to their perfect vacation. We'd see about that. That evening, I sat in my home office with a legal pad, a calculator, and the same methodical approach I'd used to solve manufacturing problems for 4 decades. The difference was that this time the problem wasn't a faulty production line or a budget shortfall. It was my own family's betrayal. At the top of the page I wrote "Problem Family Conspiracy to Exclude Primary Stakeholder from Self-Funded Project While Retaining Financial Benefits." It felt oddly comforting to frame it in engineering terms. Emotions were messy, unpredictable variables that clouded judgment. But problems had solutions. You just had to analyze the data systematically and identify the optimal response. I started with what I knew for certain, documenting everything I'd overheard with the precision I'd once used for incident reports. Time approximately 2:15 p.m. Location Marcus's living room. Participants Brittany Walker, Marcus Walker, Richard Sterling, Linda Sterling. Topic: systematic exclusion of Jeffrey Walker from Caribbean cruise while retaining his $25,000 financial investment. Key quotes went into a separate column. The old man is going to be a problem. He'll be a burden the entire time. We're doing this for his own good. Each phrase was a data point evidence of their true intentions and character. The emotional processing came next, and I approached it like any other engineering challenge. Hurt feelings were natural. I'd been betrayed by people I'd trusted and supported for years. Anger was logical. They'd planned to steal from me while convincing me it was for my benefit. Disappointment was inevitable. My son had chosen his wife's manipulation over his father's dignity. But dwelling on emotions wouldn't solve the problem. I needed to channel these feelings into productive analysis. I drew a decision tree on the next page, mapping out my options with the same systematic approach I'd used for capital investment decisions. Option A: confront them directly with what I'd overheard. Pros: immediate satisfaction, moral high ground. Cons: they'd simply adjust their strategy, become more careful, potentially accelerate their timeline. Option B: accept the situation passively, allow them to execute their plan. Pros: avoid family conflict, maintain relationships. Cons: enable their behavior, lose $25,000, sacrifice personal dignity, set precedent for future exploitation. Option C: strategic counter-response using superior information and resource control. Pros: maintain element of surprise, deliver consequences proportional to betrayal, protect assets, while teaching valuable lesson. Cons: potential permanent damage to family relationships. The analysis was clear. Option A would only make them more careful criminals. Option B would make me a willing victim. Option C was the only response that addressed both the immediate problem and the underlying pattern of disrespect. I opened a new spreadsheet on my computer, the same software I'd used for decades to analyze manufacturing costs and efficiency metrics. This time I was analyzing the cost of family betrayal. Cruise investment $25,000. Years of generous gifts, loans, and support to Marcus and Brittany, conservatively $75,000. Emotional investment in maintaining family relationships, despite consistent disrespect, immeasurable. Expected return on investment, 0 based on demonstrated behavior patterns. The numbers didn't lie. I'd been subsidizing people who saw me as an inconvenience at best, a resource to be managed at worst. From a purely financial perspective, continuing this relationship was throwing good money after bad. But this wasn't just about money. It was about respect, dignity, and the fundamental principle that actions have consequences. They wanted to treat me like a senile old man who could be manipulated and discarded. Fine. But they'd forgotten that this particular old man had spent 40 years solving complex problems and managing difficult people. The solution crystallized in my mind with the clarity of a well-designed system. They wanted the cruise without me. They'd get neither the cruise nor my money. They wanted to exclude me from family decisions. They'd discover what real exclusion felt like. They wanted to treat me like I was incompetent. They'd learn exactly how competent I could be when properly motivated. I started a new document, Strategic Response Plan, Operation Family Accountability, Phase 1 Secure Assets. The cruise booking was in my name, paid with my credit card. I had complete control over the reservation and could cancel it at any time. They'd planned to steal the tickets through deception, but they'd overlooked a crucial detail: you can't steal something that no longer exists. Phase 2, Document Everything. I'd already started this process, but I needed more comprehensive records. Dates, conversations, financial contributions, instances of disrespect. If this escalated to legal action, I wanted bulletproof documentation. Phase 3, Strategic Communications. They expected me to be confused and grateful when they protected me from the cruise. Instead, they'd discover that I knew exactly what they'd planned and had taken appropriate countermeasures. The beauty of the plan was its simplicity. They'd created an elaborate conspiracy to solve a problem that didn't exist: my supposed inability to handle a cruise vacation. I would solve the actual problem, their disrespectful, manipulative behavior, with straightforward consequences. I leaned back in my chair, feeling something I hadn't experienced in months: professional satisfaction. This was what I'd been good at during my working years: identifying problems, analyzing options, implementing solutions. The fact that the problem involved my family instead of manufacturing processes didn't change the fundamental approach. Margaret would have hated this situation, but I thought she'd approve of my response. She'd always believed that people needed to face consequences for their actions. You can't enable bad behavior by protecting people from the results of their choices, she'd often said, when discussing Marcus's tendency to avoid responsibility. Well, Marcus and his wife were about to learn about consequences. I printed out my analysis and filed it carefully in a new folder labeled Family Issues 2024. Then I opened my laptop and navigated to the cruise line's website. The cancellation policy was clear: full refund if canceled more than 14 days before departure, partial refund between 7 to 14 days, no refund within 7 days. We were exactly 7 days out. Perfect timing. But I didn't cancel immediately. That would be phase 1 of implementation, and I wasn't quite ready for that step. First, I wanted to gather more intelligence, document their continued deception, maybe even give them one last chance to demonstrate basic human decency. I suspected they'd fail that test spectacularly. As I prepared for bed that night, I felt calmer than I had in weeks. The hurt was still there, but it was manageable now, contained within a larger framework of purposeful action. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was an engineer with a problem to solve. And I'd always been very good at solving problems. Tomorrow I'd begin implementing the solution. Tonight I'd sleep better than I had since Margaret died, knowing that I was finally taking control of my life instead of letting other people manage it for me. The old man they'd called me, the burden, they had no idea what this old man was capable of when he put his mind to it. Over the next few days I implemented my strategic plan with the same methodical precision I'd once used to manage production schedules. But first, I needed an outside perspective from someone I trusted, someone who wasn't emotionally invested in maintaining family harmony at any cost. Frank Morrison was working in his garden when I approached him Thursday morning, carrying 2 cups of coffee and the weight of my discovery. At 71, Frank had seen enough of human nature during his police career to offer practical advice without judgment. "You look like a man with something on his mind," he observed, accepting the coffee and settling onto his back porch steps. I told him everything. The overheard conspiracy, the old man comments Marcus's weakness, the detailed plan to exclude me while keeping my money. Frank listened without interruption, his old cop instincts processing the information with professional detachment. "How long has this pattern been going on?" he asked when I finished. "Years, if I'm honest. But I kept making excuses, hoping things would improve." Frank nodded slowly. "Jeff, I've seen this before. Financial elder abuse, they call it now. Usually it's more subtle. Small amounts here and there, gradual isolation, making the victim feel like they're the problem. Your situation is more brazen, but it's the same basic pattern." The term hit me like a cold slap. Financial elder abuse. I'd thought of it as family conflict, generational differences, maybe even my own oversensitivity. But Frank was right. This was systematic exploitation disguised as concern. "What would you do?" I asked. Frank was quiet for a long moment, staring at his carefully tended tomato plants. "When I was on the force, we'd see cases like this all the time. Family members who thought they were entitled to an elderly relative's money just because they were family. The victims who fought back usually came out better than the ones who tried to keep the peace. I'm not sure I want to destroy what's left of my relationship with Marcus. Jeff Frank said gently, "What relationship? You just told me your son sat there while his wife planned to steal from you and call you a burden. That's not a relationship. That's a hostage situation." His words stung because they were true. I'd been so focused on maintaining the illusion of family unity that I'd ignored the reality of family dysfunction. "I think you need legal advice," Frank continued. "Not necessarily to sue anyone, but to protect yourself and understand your options. I know a good attorney, Tom Richardson. He handled my neighbor's estate planning last year, very straightforward guy." That afternoon I called Tom Richardson's office and scheduled an appointment for the next day. I told his secretary it was about estate planning and asset protection, technically true if incomplete. Richardson's office was exactly what I'd expected from Frank's recommendation. Professional but not pretentious, with the kind of practical efficiency I appreciated. Tom himself was about my age, with the kind of direct manner that comes from decades of dealing with family disputes. "Frank Morrison says you need some legal guidance about family issues," he said, settling behind his desk with a legal pad. "What's the situation?" I laid out, the facts systematically, the crew's investment, the overheard conspiracy, the pattern of financial exploitation, my concerns about future incidents. Richardson took notes with the efficiency of someone who'd heard similar stories many times. "First question," he said when I finished. "Do you want to pursue criminal charges? What they're planning could constitute theft by deception, conspiracy to commit fraud, possibly elder abuse, depending on how the prosecutor's office views it." The thought hadn't occurred to me. "I just want them to understand there are consequences for their behavior." Fair enough. Civil remedies might be more appropriate anyway. "Now, about your estate planning. When was your will last updated?" "About 5 years ago." "Everything goes to Marcus with some charitable bequests." Richardson leaned back in his chair. "Given what you've told me, you might want to reconsider that arrangement. Not out of spite, but as a practical matter. If your son is willing to participate in financial exploitation now, what happens when you're actually vulnerable, when you need care, or when you're dealing with serious health issues?" The question crystallized something I'd been avoiding. This wasn't just about a cruise. It was about establishing boundaries, protecting my future, and making it clear that respect and inheritance went hand in hand. What are my options? Several approaches. You could revise the will to include conditions. Respectful treatment, no financial exploitation, that sort of thing. You could reduce Marcus's inheritance and increase charitable bequests. Or you could establish a trust with specific guidelines for distribution. I found myself thinking about Margaret's favorite charity, the senior center where she'd volunteered for years, helping elderly people who'd been abandoned or exploited by their families. What if I wanted to leave the bulk of my estate to charity with only a token amount for Marcus? Perfectly legal, and given the circumstances, probably defensible if anyone tried to contest it. We'd want to document your reasoning, make sure you're clearly competent when you sign the documents, maybe include a video statement explaining your decision. The meeting lasted 2 hours. When I left Richardson's office, I had a clear understanding of my legal options, and an appointment to return the following week to sign new estate documents. More importantly, I had a sense of empowerment that I hadn't felt in years. But there was still the matter of the cruise itself. That evening I sat in my office with the cruise line's customer service number on my computer screen. 7 days before departure. The cutoff for any refund had passed, but that was no longer the point. The money was already lost. The question was whether they'd benefit from my loss. I made the call. "Caribbean Cruises, this is Jennifer. How can I help you today? I need to cancel a reservation," I said, my voice steady. "Booking number CC28479156. "I'm sorry to hear that, mister." "Walker. May I ask the reason for the cancellation? Family circumstances have changed." There was typing on the other end, then a pause. "I see this is a 5-passenger booking departing tomorrow. I have to inform you that cancellations within 7 days of departure are non-refundable." "I understand. Please proceed with the cancellation." "Sir, that's a significant financial loss. Are you certain you want to proceed?" For a moment I thought about the $25,000, money that Margaret and I had saved carefully over decades of modest living. But then I thought about Brittany's voice calling me the old man, about Marcus's weakness in failing to defend me, about their casual cruelty in planning my humiliation. "I'm certain. Cancel the entire booking." "Very well, sir. The reservation has been canceled. You should receive a confirmation email within the next hour. I hung up and sat back in my chair, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and loss. The money was gone, but so was their ability to profit from my generosity while treating me with contempt. Now came the most challenging part, maintaining the facade until the confrontation. For the next few days, I had to act like nothing had changed, respond to their continued deception with apparent naivety, let them think their plan was working perfectly. Marcus called twice during the week, both conversations following the same pattern. Casual questions about my packing, progress reminders about departure logistics, subtle probes about where I kept the travel documents. Each conversation was a masterclass in manipulation, and I played my part perfectly. The confused but cooperative old man, who was grateful for their help with the complicated arrangements. Brittany called once, her voice honey-sweet with false concern. "Jeffrey, I just want to make sure you're not overexerting yourself with all this travel preparation. If you need help with anything, packing, organizing documents, whatever, just let me know." "That's very thoughtful," I replied. "I think I have everything under control, but I'll certainly call if I need assistance. And you have all the cruise documents in a safe place. We don't want any last-minute complications at the airport." "Everything's organized and ready to go," I assured her, which was technically true. The cancellation confirmation was indeed organized and ready. By Friday evening, less than 48 hours before our scheduled departure, I had completed all my preparations. The new will was drafted and ready for signing. The cruise was canceled. My evidence was documented and filed. My strategy was clear, and my resolve was firm. I spent that evening going through photo albums, looking at pictures of Margaret, and remembering her advice about standing up for yourself. She'd never tolerated disrespect, never enabled bad behavior, never sacrificed her dignity for the sake of keeping peace. "You'd be proud of me," I told her photograph. "I'm finally learning to fight back." Saturday morning would bring the confrontation I'd been preparing for all week. Brittany would come for the tickets, expecting to find a confused old man grateful for her concern. Instead, she'd discover that this particular old man had been several steps ahead of her from the beginning. I went to bed that night with a clear conscience and a strategic plan. For the first time since Margaret's death, I felt like I was truly in control of my life. Tomorrow, my family would learn that actions have consequences, and that respect isn't something you can take for granted just because you shared DNA. Tomorrow, the old man would show them exactly what he was capable of when pushed too far. Saturday morning, 6:00 a.m. sharp. I was already dressed and drinking my first cup of coffee when I heard the car door slam in my driveway. Through the kitchen window, I could see Brittany's white BMW, and I felt a surge of satisfaction. Right on schedule. I'd been awake since 4:30, not from nervousness, but from anticipation. After a week of careful preparation, the moment of truth had finally arrived. I was as ready as I'd ever been for anything in my life. The doorbell rang with the kind of insistent urgency that suggested this wasn't a social call. I took my time walking to the front door, carrying my coffee cup and maintaining the calm demeanor I'd practiced all week. Brittany stood on my front porch, dressed in an expensive jogging outfit that probably cost more than most people's monthly grocery budget. Her hair was perfect, her makeup flawless, and her smile had that brittle quality I'd learned to recognize as her business face. "Jeffrey," she said brightly, as if showing up at my house at dawn was the most natural thing in the world. "I hope I'm not too early, but I wanted to catch you before things get hectic with the departure preparations." "Good morning, Brittany," I replied evenly. "This is certainly a surprise. Would you like some coffee?" "Oh, that's sweet, but I can't stay long. I just came to pick up the cruise documents." "You know how these travel days can be. So much to coordinate, and I want to make sure we have everything organized before we head to the airport." There it was, direct and to the point, just as I'd expected. No pretense about checking on my well-being or helping with last-minute preparations. She'd come for the tickets exactly as her conspiracy had planned. "The documents are secure," I said calmly. "We can handle all the check-in procedures when we meet at the airport." Her smile flickered slightly. "Actually, Jeffrey, it would be much more efficient if I could take care of everything now. You know how confusing these modern travel systems can be, and I've already coordinated with the travel agent about some special arrangements." "What special arrangements?" "Oh, just some upgrades and activity bookings. Nothing for you to worry about." She stepped closer to the door, as if expecting to be invited inside. "So if you could just grab those documents." "I think there's been a misunderstanding," I said, not moving from the doorway. "The travel documents stay with me. I'm perfectly capable of managing my own affairs." The mask slipped a little further. "Jeffrey, let's be practical here. These cruise companies have very specific procedures, and if something goes wrong at check-in, it could delay everyone. I'm just trying to help. Help with what exactly? Her patience was clearly wearing thin. Look, I don't have time for games. We need those documents now, or we're all going to miss the ship. Just give me the tickets and confirmation numbers, and I'll handle everything else. I took a sip of my coffee, studying her face. The false sweetness was gone now, replaced by barely controlled frustration. This was the real Brittany, demanding, entitled, accustomed to getting her way through manipulation and pressure. I'm afraid I can't do that, I said quietly. What do you mean you can't do that? Her voice rose slightly. Jeffrey, stop being difficult. We have a schedule to keep, and you're being unreasonable. Am I? I set my coffee cup down on the small table by the door. Tell me, Brittany, what exactly did you think would happen this morning? Something in my tone must have alerted her because her expression changed from frustrated to wary. I don't know what you mean. I think you do. See, I had the most interesting experience last Wednesday afternoon. I stopped by Marcus's house to bring you all a fruit tart, a peace offering, you might say. But when I got there, I discovered you were having a family meeting. The color drained from her face. I heard some fascinating things through that open living room window. I continued, my voice remaining calm and conversational. Discussions about the old man who would be a burden on your vacation. Plans to exclude me from a cruise I paid for while keeping my money. Calculations about cabin savings and reduced tips. Brittany opened her mouth, but no words came out. You called me an old man, Brittany. You said I'd slow everyone down, that I'd ruin your perfect vacation. You planned to steal my tickets and then convince me it was for my own good. I looked directly into her eyes. That was a big mistake. Jeffrey, you don't understand. Oh, I understand perfectly. You thought you were dealing with a confused, helpless old man who could be manipulated and discarded. But you forgot something important. What's that? She whispered. This old man spent 40 years solving complex problems and managing people who underestimated him. And right now, you've become my problem to solve. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a printed email, unfolding it slowly. This is a confirmation from Caribbean Cruises. Booking number C284799156. Canceled yesterday at 7:00 p.m. Her eyes widened as she processed what I was saying. You didn't. I did. The entire cruise reservation. 5 passengers, 14 days, all shore excursions, specialty dining. Canceled completely. $25,000 down the drain. You can't do that, she exploded. We've planned for months. We've taken time off work. My parents canceled important appointments. Your parents, I raised an eyebrow. You mean the people who suggested I transfer the booking to your name for convenience? The ones who thought I was too old and incompetent to manage my own travel arrangements. Brittany's composure cracked completely. This is insane. You're destroying a family vacation out of spite. No, I said firmly. I'm protecting myself from people who plan to exclude me from a vacation I paid for while lying to my face about their concern for my welfare. There's a difference. We can fix this, she said desperately. We can rebook something. I'll call the cruise line right now and explain it was a mistake. There's nothing to fix, Brittany. You wanted a vacation without the old man. Congratulations. You got exactly what you asked for. She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her mind racing, looking for some angle, some way to salvage her plan. Finally, she played what she probably thought was her trump card. Marcus is going to be devastated. This will destroy your relationship with your son. My relationship with Marcus was destroyed the moment he sat in that living room and let you plan to humiliate his father. He made his choice when he chose your manipulation over basic respect for the man who raised him. You're making a huge mistake, she said, her voice turning cold and threatening. We won't forget this. Neither will I replied calmly, and neither will my lawyer who has documented everything quite thoroughly. That stopped her cold. Your lawyer, financial elder abuse is a serious crime, Brittany. Conspiracy to defraud, theft by deception. These are real charges with real consequences. My attorney was quite interested in the details of your plan. For the first time since I'd known her, Brittany looked genuinely frightened. You wouldn't? I haven't decided yet. That depends largely on how you and your family behave going forward. She stood there for another moment, clearly struggling with the realization that she'd completely misjudged the situation. The confused old man she'd planned to manipulate had outmaneuvered her at every step. This isn't over, she finally said, but there was no conviction in her voice. Yes, it is, I replied. It's been over since the moment you called me an old man and planned to steal from me. You just didn't realize it yet. I stepped back and began to close the door. "Have a nice day, Brittany." "I certainly intend to." As I watched her walk back to her car, her perfect composure completely shattered. I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the deep satisfaction of a problem solved correctly. The old man had indeed made a big mistake, the mistake of underestimating his own worth and tolerating disrespect for far too long. But that mistake had finally been corrected. 3 months later, I'm sitting on the deck of a small cruise ship in the Mediterranean watching the sunset paint the Greek islands in shades of gold and crimson. The couple at the next table, Helen and Robert from Phoenix, are sharing stories about their grandchildren, and I find myself smiling at their obvious joy in each other's company. This isn't the Caribbean cruise I originally planned. It's something better, a journey I chose for myself, with people who appreciate my company rather than tolerate it. The irony isn't lost on me by losing my biological family. I discovered what real family actually means. The legal matters resolved themselves more quickly than I'd expected. Marcus called exactly once. After that morning confrontation, his voice a mixture of anger and desperation. "Dad, we need to talk. Brittany says you've lost your mind, but I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding." I told him there was no misunderstanding. I'd heard every word they'd said, and I'd responded accordingly. The silence that followed spoke volumes about his complicity in their plan. My new will was finalized 2 weeks later. The bulk of my estate now supports a foundation that helps elderly Americans who've been financially exploited by their families. It's Margaret's legacy as much as mine. She always believed that people should face consequences for their choices, and that dignity wasn't negotiable at any age. The house feels different now, not empty but peaceful. Frank Morrison still comes by for coffee most mornings, and we've been joined by Tom Richardson, my attorney who's become a genuine friend rather than just professional counsel. We've started a weekly poker game that's drawn in several other neighborhood retirees, and I've discovered that chosen family can be every bit as meaningful as blood relations, sometimes more so. I learned something important during those dark weeks of discovery and confrontation. Respect isn't something you're owed because of your age or your generosity. It's something you have to demand, defend, and sometimes fight for. The moment you accept being treated as less than your worth, you teach people that your worth is negotiable. My son made his choice when he sat silently while his wife planned to humiliate and steal from his father. I made mine when I refused to enable their behavior any longer. Some relationships can't be repaired. They can only be ended with dignity and tact. As I finish my evening coffee and prepare to return to my cabin, I think about the title of this story. As soon as I paid for the trip, my son's wife stole the tickets and called me old man. Big mistake. Brittany was right about one thing. It was indeed a big mistake. Just not the mistake she thought she was making. The biggest mistake would have been staying silent, accepting their treatment, and teaching them that there are no consequences for cruelty disguised as concern. Instead, I chose to show them that this particular old man still had some fight left in him. And you know what? At 67, I'm just getting started. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.